What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for Your Overwatch. Today we're going to be breaking down the wacky new experimental card that the content creators have put through to give us some content while we wait for Overwatch 2. Always remember, these are wacky changes, most of which aren't intended to go to live, but once in a while a cool idea does get implemented. With that in mind, we'll try not to go too in-depth while still trying to pick up on the major themes that these changes could have on Overwatch if some of them were implemented. Two clashing philosophies come into play at once, where Lemon Kiwi was handling the tanks, and I think you'll find attempted to make them much less punishing to play, but perhaps in many cases more of a supportive role rather than the thick DPS we're used to them being. On the other hand, Jake and Wanted, who did the DPS, really overtuned their category this time, I think, specifically for high-end players. This is a patch that I think DPS picks will hard carry, and last but not least, ML7 was in charge of the support characters, and I'd say has put in some more skillful interactions that emphasizes decision making and takes away some of the easier support values. Changes applied to the entire game. All hit scan damage scales to 50% at maximum fall off range from 30%. That alone, with a lot of the crazy buffs, I think flex DPS players are going to be happy to try out this patch. From the tanks though, all damage across the board from their weapons, abilities, and ultimates are halved. Massive nerf. So many of the tanks will feel like they can kill nothing, and perhaps more importantly, might struggle to find any leverage against the opposing tank, because many of them have increased health as well. However, crowd control effects on tanks are also halved. Pretty much everything except the following ults, Blizzard, Shatter, Graviton Surge, and Primal Rage, you'll get less effect from. So what I think this means for you tank players as a general rule on this patch, my advice would be to anchor the objective and look for opportunities to land your new status effects. The first one being Reinhardt, who you will notice has a lot more health, but remember that hammer is far less threatening, so you'll want to change your playstyle. Targets hit by a fire strike now receive 50% less healing for 4 seconds. I think that's your key play in between that and your Earth Shatter, because with so little damage, you're not threatening enough to go chase things down, but instead set up a teammate to deal damage for you. Pin can be canceled again and pin multiple targets, which is really cute, as well as moves faster at the start of it. This array of balance changes, I think, incentivizes you to play around your team much tighter. You'll still die to focus fire and won't get much done going in too deep alone. Next is Orisa, who gallops down the street with Fortify now with 40% more movement speed, retaining the damage reduction, mind you, and 20% of both of those buffs goes to her team in close proximity. Halt now is reworked, no longer a projectile, will tether the enemy to Orisa for 1.5 seconds. Be careful with this. It doesn't trap them down, it just stops them from running away from you. Think of it like a dog leash, but with only 1.5 seconds, you'll want to pop it as soon as they're trying to get away to lock them down. You might consider comboing it with her supercharger now, which instead of amplifying damage, instead slows targets within the range. Between the two of these abilities, Orisa running in will be able to lock down enemies for your DPS to pick up. Zarya no longer has shield health and is perhaps one of the more affected characters by the damage nerf, since that was such a big part of her identity before. However, Particle Barrier, when given to an ally, gives them a movement buff. Half a percentage per 1 point of energy. I'll note though, it'll be harder to gain energy, I think, as Zarya, because the enemy tank's damage will be lower just like yours is. So you won't be farming up as easily perhaps, unless you're playing against very spammy DPS. Regardless though, a bubble that gives a speed boost to characters like Doomfist and especially Genji, as you'll see later, I think could be insane, because pocketing your DPS might be the way to go on this patch. And tanks might just be kind of irrelevant to the win condition of any team fight, because they look on the opposite end of the spectrum of the last experimental card, kind of worthless to me. But this patch is a little tricky. I'm not as confident this time of what will be meta, but that's my early impression. Sigma now has more control of his primary fire, shooting one projectile at a time, which means you're not locked into the animation, but it also means you can rapid fire it more easily, I think. The damage is still insignificant though, so I'm not too high on Sigma. However, he can get an extra accretion charge if you successfully land the first one. No more than that though. But still, chain stunning something yourself is pretty nuts. So I think Sigma might low-key be better than I think, especially when you combine with the flexibility he has now, again, with Experimental's cooldown being reduced to 0.1 seconds. He can instantly whip it in and out, which gives him a lot of skill ceiling with the flexibility to block a lot of damage and cooldowns dynamically. While an average level Sigma perhaps would have preferred the old version, a higher level Sigma might get a lot out of him in this version. But still, with that damage nerf going down, I think you might just prefer having a tankier tank just soak up on the objective, especially when you look at some of the support buffs. Keeping with that theme, the more DPS-minded tanks I think get hit the hardest by this patch. Wrecking Ball gets a quality of life with his grappling claw, allowing to maintain spinning after 6 seconds, which was a recent change that was a bit controversial. However, he's only allowed to move after 6 seconds, no longer doing all the cool stuff he usually gets to do. So neither here nor there, in my opinion. Minefield, remember, its damage is lowered, but will blind enemies for 2.5 seconds. People are not gonna like that, I think. However, I'm curious how a blind effect will work in Overwatch. My guess is that it's not actually that good, just annoying, but we'll see. Maybe there's certain combos where that really matters. At the moment, I don't think so. Hitting enemies with Pile Driver will reduce the cooldown of Adaptive Shield by 1 second per enemy hit, which although is cute and will give you more tanking, remember, the other tanks have a lot of natural health anyway, so I don't know if this really competes, although it may be a fun mechanic to mess with. Roadhog gets a lot of interesting changes, but with all the other changes to the other tanks, I think he might just be the worst, easily, by far. He does get his own natural armor, but with his damage reducing and a lot of other tanks having natural armor health increased, he's gonna feel useless up against just about every other tank. Though when he does pull a squishy in, they come in a lot faster. That feels good. Maybe a change they might consider. And Take a Breather is a pretty interesting supportive ability. Breather will now heal more the more teammates you have nearby, more damage reduction when playing near his tank, and will apply 25% damage reduction to nearby allies. Whole Hog won't knock back enemies, but can be canceled, which I think will be fun for comboing as well as finally shredding tanks. Diva has 2 seconds of boosters, meaning she can fly in the air infinitely when combined with her new passive. That essentially is Angelic Descent from Mercy, where she can just float in air indefinitely. With the combination of these two, Diva never has to touch the ground and can fly around just like she does in the animated shorts. Do keep in mind that her damage is lowered, but with this added flexibility, I think she'll really be able to contest flying characters like never before. And the skill ceiling of this kind of mobility is out of control, especially with all the tricks you can imagine doing, getting Defense Matrix in a key position to block an ultimate, which now, when you do eat an ultimate, you gain 30% of your ult charge. A massive swing in value. Keep in mind, those floating tricks can also be used to drop down a stealthy Diva Bomb. Winston got some really cool changes. Another one that I'm pretty scared about, though, because his damage just sucks against armor, and tanks have a lot of it now, and his damage was lowered so much that you might feel like he can never kill anything. But to compensate for that, he gets more health himself and a insane Primal Rage. Jump Pack now supposedly slightly launches nearby enemies up in the air, but in my experience, I could hardly get this to work. Maybe it's a bug or something. Primal Rage, however, gives you more health, but similar to like rage mechanics in MMO games or MOBAs, you actually decay health over time. But to compensate, Winston's ult gets a massive buff. You're able to load up a Primal Rage Fist to increase its knockback, which means you have loads of juggling opportunities and plenty of ways to knock characters off the map. I want to see a player like Boger use this ability. The skill ceiling of this is insane. Now moving on to the stars of this patch, I think Genji is overtuned to the max. Swift Strike has an extra charge, and you still get one per elimination, so you can stack them up and just constantly be Swift Striking everywhere. Not to mention, Swift Striking into the air and then activating Dragon Blade will also get you another charge, meaning you will just be untouchable with that alone. Its damage is lower, but the mobility will be just so nuts that a lot of characters will struggle to hit Genji at all. Granted, to compensate, Dragon Blade only lasts 3 seconds, so more to assassinate rather than go for the 6-man blades. However, after Dragon Blade ends, Genji gains 40% faster attack speed, which might be stronger than the blade itself in the right hands anyway. And you'll note this actually is a longer duration than the blade was before, so overall a massive buff in my opinion. Genji is outrageous. Doomfist now has an interesting mechanic where when he uses a cooldown for mobility, when it doesn't hit an enemy, it will reduce his other cooldowns by 1 second, which gives him a lot more uptime. He also is able to cancel Seismic Slam so he doesn't overcommit into a bad engagement. Echo's glide speed increased by 15%, and final blows will give her health. Mei will do double melee damage to frozen targets, and her ice wall can launch enemies into the air. Teammates as well, actually. So there could be some nuts Mei set plays where you like launch your Ana into the sky to land an anti-nade into their backline. Forget thinking of Mei's ice wall as an isolation technique. Now it's a launch pad. Pharah now has 2 concussive blasts, but you can't stack them on an enemy for a double boop. This means you'll want to use one to get in and another to boop the enemy and displace them. Rockets have more impact, but also give like a concussive effect to the enemy where they'll be slowed down for half a second, making your next rocket easier to land and just overall really disabling the enemy. Junkrat no longer has audible footsteps for the enemy team, meaning he can flank a lot easier, and Riptire will scale off of walls, and Riptire will have increased movement speed when detaching from walls, meaning you can launch them off to go hit a flyer. Sombra's rework puts her more into the DPS category, as well as removing the old infinite stealth mechanic. Damage and fire rate goes up, hack duration goes down, and hack will have a longer cooldown when interrupted. Stealth only lasts for 8 seconds, but won't play an audio cue when you come out of it. Bastion has some hilarious changes. No longer goes into sentry mode, but why need it when they gave him 100 rounds in the magazine and he can self-repair while firing? I think this might be low-key a super nutty buff, considering they also reduced his character size by 15%. Hanzo no longer has Storm Arrow, but instead a new ability, which I'll call something like a focus mechanic in other games, where when he pops the new version of Storm Arrow, or Focus, he has a shorter lunge cooldown, only 1 second, he can jump around, no longer has the movement penalty, and the draw time of the bow is almost halved, meaning that you can fire a lot quicker. In a skilled Hanzo's hands, this will be insane. Torbjorn now will deal added damage with each successive shot hit. Ashe now has a quicker reload and no longer does 1 bullet at a time. Dynamite doesn't damage yourself and also doesn't have damage fall off, meaning anywhere in the explosion will deal 50 damage. We can expect Cassidy to have a fun buff, molded in the vision of Wanted, who's a mega specialist on this character. Health goes back down to 200, and lower level McCree players will despair. No longer does McCree have Fan the Hammer. To compensate though, the weapon speed goes back to 0.42 seconds of recovery time, meaning rapid fire McCree is back, but he's a lot more punishable with less health, as well as a longer duration of combat roll, which no longer can be used in the air. Reaper's cooldowns go down significantly for both. Shadow Step only 5 seconds now, Wraith Form only 4, and you can even use Shadow Step while in Wraith Form, which means if you somehow accidentally get booped off the map, you can save yourself. Or like be coming out of Shadow Step in Wraith Form so that you can't be stunned. A lot of fun tricks you can do with those cooldowns now, but keep in mind, Wraith Form won't reload your weapon and won't increase your movement speed, so you have to use this tactically. Soldier 76 now doesn't deal self-damage with Helix Rocket, slightly longer cooldown. Widowmaker has some cool changes, where although Venom Mine does a lot less damage, you can eventually stack up to 3, which will make it progressively harder for enemy flankers to sneak up on you as you kind of mark down all the flank routes on the map. Tracer's Pulse Bomb got reworked significantly so that it charges even faster than you're used to, but the explosion does much less damage, only 190, meaning it itself can't even one-shot a squishy. You'll have to combo in a melee or some additional damage. But I don't think you'll mind considering how fast you'll now get them. Last up is the support category. You can expect ML7 to give Ana some crazy toys. Ana's reload is only 0.75 seconds now, feels instant to me. And these sleep dart changes, I think, are the type of quality of life thing that the game should just have. Sleeps appear in the kill feed, and there is an icon above a sleeping target so that everyone can see it more clearly. But Nano Boost is where the fun really begins. A Nano Boosted target now also receives 50% increased healing. The cast is instant, and when your teammate with Nano gets a final blow, your cooldowns go down by a second, meaning you can run in aggressively with them and land another sleep and anti-nade more quickly. That's awesome. Batiste's Exo Boots can now super jump, and Immortality Field gets an interesting change. It only lasts 1.5 seconds, which means you only should pull the trigger on this to interact with an ability immediately. Also keep in mind that at such a short duration, it's not really going to save you from just about any ultimate, but it will save teammates at 20% health up from 10. Overall though, a pretty big nerf to Lamp. Batiste can also self-heal through his own ultimate now. Brigitte has a longer distance on Shield Bash and also will go farther when colliding with terrain, making it easier to scale up and gain mobility, but has a really wacky interaction with Whip Shot now while using Rally. Consider this like a super Whip Shot, where she'll spin around in a circle, do a whirlwind, hitting every enemy within 7 meters. But it locks her in place, and Whip Shot's cooldown will be increased by the remaining time of Rally plus 4 seconds. So what this means is it's like a big burst of an ability that you'll want to use once for big value, and if you use it too early, you won't get another Whip Shot for forever. So it's less punishing the longer you wait in using Rally to use it, but I think overall is kind of like a nerf because you won't get multiple Whip Shots during Rally. So you'll have to be careful when playing Brig now to not need Whip Shot to protect yourself if you have to burn it early on in the Rally, but it can make a much bigger play if used well. Lucio will do more damage while riding on walls, and Sound Barrier will apply a boop as well, which means it's possible for you to set up a double boop knockoff kill yourself. Mercy gets what I think is an excellent change. Valkyrie and Resurrect have now been swapped. Valkyrie's duration is only 3 seconds, which means you can use it for added mobility for yourself, or it's good to clutch heal a single ally, no longer your whole team, for 70 healing a second. Much like the rest of ML7's changes here, I feel this is to really reward quick decision making and make the character feel more interactive as opposed to just hiding around a corner all the time. You'll want to actually go in and make use of this ability and be more in the clutch. For Resurrect, on the ultimate ability again, Mass Res is back, with a bigger range and up to 5 teammates being restored back to life. You might think this is overkill, but considering an ability like Batiste's Lamp no longer protects you from all manner of ultimates, I personally don't mind the idea of Mercy resing a team after an ult combo, but I know that's a controversial opinion. It hasn't been in the game for Mass Res hasn't been in the game for many years now. It'll be interesting how the community receives it now that it's back. Moira now has a passive where her quick melee will slow an enemy for a second, though you only can use it once every 10 seconds, so you can't combo it, just use it that one time, but that's really gonna make your damage orbs more significant against flankers up close to you. Moira's orbs now are a bit more of skill orbs. They no longer change their speed when near a target. Instead, you're gonna have to choose the speed that you want it. Just tapping the ability will fire the orb slowly, or you can charge it up to really send it flying quick. I suggest most of the time, if the target, like your teammate or an enemy, is close to you, you want it to come out slowly so it lingers where you want it to deal more damage or do more healing. However, if you're trying to snipe something really far and just do a bit of damage on something running away from you, then try to charge it up so it catches up to them. Coalescence gets a buff where if you channel it on an enemy for 2 seconds, it'll lift them off the ground for easy focus fire, similar to the lift effect in Grav Flux. In fact, it's the same animation. Zenyatta now has a new passive called Elevation, which gives him a super jump of his own, more ammo, and a very interesting rework to Orb of Harmony. Tanks will get 20% damage reduction, damage get 10% movement speed, and supports, your other support on your team of course, get more healing out of it. But I'd say that's the weakest of the three. Orb of Discord only deals 20% damage amp now. And the last change is to Symmetra, who's now in the support role. Quite significant damage reduction across the board, and a rework to her sentry turrets, which now have more health, but don't deal damage. Instead, each turret will heal 20 per second. They have a longer range, faster build time, and a shorter cooldown, but I don't know how I feel about these healing turrets. We'll have to test these out. I think they might be a bit unwieldy and unreliable, as it's going to be tough for you to heal who you want to heal, and it forces you to fight in that location. But maybe you only want to use Sim on those perfect Symmetra maps with the good teleporter spots, like Lijiang Night Market. When popping out of a teleporter, you now get a move speed increase, and Photon Barrier gets significant nerfs, though a cost reduction. But keep in mind, her damage is much lower, so either way, that more or less is still a net nerf, in my opinion. Well, guys, that's everything for the crazy experimental changes. Do you think any of these should go to live? This one, I think, will be more contentious than the last, as the gap between the types of changes are more severe to me, as opposed to a very holistic idea, which the last patch was. I think tanks are just going to feel like big punching bags, while the supports and DPS carry and pop off, which maybe is what they'll feel like in Overwatch 2 anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and don't forget to hit subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live. We're going to be going crazy on this channel when Overwatch 2 properly kicks off. I can't wait. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.